Corinne Bellamy removed Imani's name card before Imani reached the family governance table. She lifted the cream card from its brass holder, handed it to an event coordinator, and replaced Imani's embossed succession folder with a plain guest packet. Trustees, donors, family office executives, and estate counsel watched without speaking. At the center of the table lay a cream estate summary folder marked with a red revised tab. Imani had come to the Founders Succession Luncheon to present the next Harbor Skills Fellowship cohort, not to defend her place in Malcolm Bellamy's family. Her work bag held instructor schedules, revised enrollment projections, and 120 index cards, each marked with a participant's training track, employer match, transportation need, and stipend deadline. Corinne turned the red-tabbed folder toward the room. Before we begin the transition agenda, the updated estate plan no longer includes Imani Bellamy as a beneficiary or family governance participant. The room became still in the careful way powerful rooms did when everyone waited to see which version of the truth would become safest. Imani looked at the folder, then at the Harbor Skills forecast projected behind Corinne. The numbers were wrong. The presentation used last year's completion rate instead of the current 86% figure, and the reserve calculation understated what the next cohort required. That forecast is outdated, Imani said. Corinne's smile tightened. This is a family matter. The slide affects 120 paid training seats. The completion rate should be 86%, and the 6-month job retention figure should be 78. Using the old data makes the next stipend release look underfunded. A trustee checked his packet. The trust finance director leaned closer to the screen. Corinne closed the estate folder. You're no longer authorized to present for the family or the education trust. She told the coordinator to remove Imani from the agenda and suspend her restricted system access. Imani's phone chimed 3 times. Presentation removed, signatory authority paused, system access suspended. At the far end of the table, Malcolm Everett Bellamy stared at the authorization page in front of him. He was 64, silver at the temples, and still capable of changing a room by raising his head. He did not raise it. Imani knew the look. He recognized his signature. Corinne rested one hand beside the red tab. The revised arrangement reflects Malcolm's final wishes. Was the instrument authenticated? Imani asked. The summary was prepared under Transition Council authority. That is not what I asked. She looked at Malcolm. Did you review the succession schedule attached to your authorization? He finally met her eyes. For 1 second, she saw the private father who had once spent Saturdays teaching her how to map factory bottlenecks with index cards. Then the public version returned. This is not the time, he said. Because the room heard him, the sentence became larger than silence. Corinne used it immediately. Ms. Brooks may remain as a guest, but she has no authority to address the trust, the family office, or the fellowship. Ms. Brooks, not daughter, not founder, guest. Imani felt the humiliation in precise places. The empty brass holder, the missing folder, the lowered eyes of donors who had praised Harbor Skills in private, the quiet removal of her microphone from the lectern. She did not reach for the estate summary. She opened her work bag, took out a mechanical pencil, and corrected the projected figures on the guest packet. You can move my chair, she said, but the stipend deadline is still Friday. Corinne turned to the board. The Transition Council will determine whether the fellowship continues in its present form. The restricted grants do not permit you to redirect the funds to a national contractor or a transition event. You are not in a position to advise this. Board, I'm telling the board what is already in its agreements. Malcolm shifted but did not intervene. Imani watched him choose institutional appearance over interruption. Corinne pointed toward the rear tables. There is general seating available. Imani picked up the plain packet. Keep the chair. She crossed the room toward Dana Okafor, the independent records and grants administrator, while the luncheon resumed behind her, as though a daughter could be erased between courses and a workforce program could be transferred by announcement. Dana's face remained professionally neutral, but her eyes moved from the red tab to the packet in Imani's hand. I need the routing label for the estate summary, Imani said quietly. and the version identifier for whatever was circulated before this morning. Dana glanced toward Corinne. I cannot release estate contents without authority. I am not asking for contents. I am asking whether the labels match. Dana paused. There were 2 summaries. Same identifier? No, same authentication code. Another pause. The later one did not have the normal code. I cannot say what that means without a formal dispute request. Imani photographed only her own packet label and a timestamp on the access revocation notice. When did the second summary enter routing? After midnight. The luncheon packets were logged yesterday afternoon. Dana nodded. Where are executed originals stored? Independent Estate Archive. Not with the Transition Council. Who can retrieve them? Estate Council after a preservation trigger, or a neutral panel if a custody dispute is opened. The archive was not a secret room or a forgotten safe. It was part of the estate's ordinary controls, inaccessible to Corinne and equally inaccessible to Imani without procedure. Imani emailed Dana a narrow request to preserve the routing metadata for both summaries. Preserve the fact that I asked before anything else changes, she said. Dana confirmed receipt. Imani moved into a side conference room where public program packets remained available even though her login had been cut off. She compared the previous month's governance index with the label on the guest packet. One was ES14A. The other was ES14C. No ES14B appeared in the public index. She recorded the discrepancy, the time, the source, and Dana's exact words without adding a conclusion Dana had not given. Her phone vibrated. Aunt Celeste had written, "Breakfast Sunday. Do not let those people make you skip eating again." Imani almost smiled. The message pulled her briefly out of the Bellamy world and back toward her East Baltimore row house, her repaired second-hand furniture, and a Saturday workshop at her mother's former community college. She carried the Bellamy name legally, but professionally she was Imani Brooks, the workforce development director who remembered participant bus routes and kept milestone cards because software could fail before people stopped needing answers. Malcolm entered the conference room alone. "You should go home," he said. "The stipend authority has been frozen. Friday is not temporary to people waiting for transportation and childcare money." He closed the door. Corinne should not have handled the announcement that way. That is not the problem. It is part of it. Did you review the schedule before signing? The authorization covered administrative preparation. Did you review it? He turned toward the courtyard window. I trusted the office to execute my instructions. Which instructions? Imani. That is my name. It is not an answer. He asked her not to turn the luncheon into an institutional crisis. She asked why an unauthenticated summary had been allowed to remove her before any process finished. He had no answer that did not lead back to his own choice. When she was 10, he had taught her that every delay had a cause and every cause left a trace. She had believed he respected systems because they protected people from arbitrary power. Now she understood that he respected them most when they protected him from direct responsibility. "Give me 24 hours, he said. I will see what can be done. You will see what can be done without admitting what you signed." His silence confirmed it. In the luncheon room, Corinne announced that all fellowship governance decisions would transfer temporarily to the Transition Council. That changed the issue from humiliation to custody. Imani checked the Friday stipend deadline, then gathered the packet, her notes, and the participant cards. She could leave the building and protect her pride, but doing so would abandon 120 people to a process controlled by the same office that had altered the record. She stayed because Harbor Skills still had a cohort to open, instructors to pay, and agreements that did not disappear when Corinne removed a name card. Corinne intercepted Imani near the elevators with a slim envelope. The confidential agreement offered a personal allowance and temporary program access if she withdrew every challenge, resigned from Harbor Skills, and accepted Corinne's national contractor. Imani read it once. "You prepared this before the luncheon. I prepared continuity. You prepared silence." She returned it and signed, opened her laptop, and attached the packet photographs and routing notes. In one combined filing, she demanded preservation of every estate summary version, recusal of Corinne's office from document custody, separation of fellowship governance from the estate dispute, and acceptance of her immediate resignation from temporary family office authority. She copied the trust secretary, independent estate counsel, Dana's office, and the external grants assessor, consented to full review of her own program records, and press send at 12:31 p.m. Her confirmations appeared in sequence. Preservation request received. Recusal request received. Governance separation request received. Resignation received. Phones began vibrating across the luncheon room. Estate counsel stood. The trust secretary closed the agenda. Corinne's smile vanished. "If you challenge this," she said, "every employer decision, grant expense, and failure will be examined." Imani thought of the fellowship's dependence on one large employer partner, a risk she had recorded but not corrected. Then examine them. Those people will still receive services. The contractor will simply provide more professional oversight. The contractor reduces paid placements, replaces local instructors, and redirects restricted funds into branding. You no longer have standing to decide that. My standing is in the agreements, the budgets, and the work. Malcolm emerged from the conference room as the system placed all disputed accounts on hold. He read the notices on his phone and looked at Imani. "You should have waited. I asked whether you reviewed the schedule. This will affect the entire trust." The trust was already treating an unauthenticated summary as fact. "I could have restored your access until the next private decision." He lowered his voice. "You have made this harder for everyone attached to the institution. The people attached to this are waiting for transportation stipends on Friday." Corinne stepped between them. "Your resignation means you cannot direct fellowship funds or represent the family office. That is why the governance review is separate. Whether I am and Malcolm's will cannot decide who is qualified to run Harbor Skills." Dana approached only far enough to remain outside the family argument. "The preservation hold is active," she said. "The archive may now secure the executed instruments." "Do not tell me what the original says," Imani replied. "Tell me when custody is secure." Near the family table, Julian Malcolm Bellamy stood with his comparison schedule half open. Imani saw his eyes stop on the line where her name still appeared in the earlier version. He closed the packet and said nothing. His silence protected whatever position Corinne had prepared for him. Imani did not ask him to become brave for her. A new system notice arrived. Her restricted access was frozen pending independent review, and every Harbor Skills decision now required approval outside the Transition Council. The filing had stopped Corinne from controlling the evidence, but it had also removed the limited authority Imani still possessed. Corinne glanced at the notice. "You may have just frozen your own program." "No," Imani said. "The structure that tied participant money to a family dispute froze it." She gathered the plain guest packet, her participant cards, and a laptop. Malcolm followed her to the elevator. "What do you expect me to do now?" She faced him as the doors opened. "Tell the truth about what you signed. Then accept that you do not. Control what the truth requires." He did not answer. Imani stepped inside with no family office access, no guarantee that the archive would support her, and no certainty that Harbor Skills could survive the review she had triggered. She had not restored her name or recovered the program. She had only made sure that Corinne's version could no longer become final through silence. As the elevator descended, the first operational alert appeared. The restricted fellowship account had been placed on hold. Imani called Marisol Chun at the training site. "Tell me what still works," she said. The freeze reached Harbor Skills before Imani did. The front office had lost access to the trust's restricted fund portal. The stipend coordinator could not release Friday's payments, and instructors stood beside the copy machine holding error notices. The building smelled of sawdust, burnt coffee, and industrial cleaner. None of it looked like a dynasty asset. That was why Imani had fought to keep the fellowship there instead of inside a Bellamy Tower. "Tell me what still works," she repeated. Attendance records remained available. Employer contacts remained available. Instructor contracts could be viewed but not changed. The trust-controlled payment queue was locked. 11 business days until orientation, Marisol said. 3 until transportation stipends should clear. Imani spread the participant index cards across a scarred work table. Call every instructor. No promises about payment timing. Tell them the truth. Anyone with an immediate childcare or transportation problem gets a direct call, not a mass email. Within 20 minutes, the largest operational threat became clear. Harlan Manufacturing had suspended all 12 apprenticeship placements, pending clarification of governance and funding authority. Its vice president sent a careful two-line message using Corinne's language. Disputed leadership, reputational uncertainty, dependence on family-controlled funds. Imani read it twice. "That is on me," she said. Marisol looked up. Corinne pressured them. "Both things can be true. I let one partner carry too much of the placement load." The 12 affected cards went into a separate row. At the emergency staff meeting, Imani explained the access freeze and the possibility that every Harbor Skills record would be reviewed. She did not promise that the will would save anything. "The worst case is that the trust keeps the accounts frozen and I remain outside formal authority," she said. "We may have to move the program into a separate entity before the cohort begins." One instructor asked whether that could be done in 11 days. "Not cleanly," Imani said, "but we can begin by making sure no single employer can collapse the cohort again." She divided the 12 cards by training track, commute radius, and certification level. Instead of replacing Harlan with another large company, she designed a distributed network. Smaller manufacturers, municipal repair vendors, hospital facilities teams, transit contractors, and union-affiliated shops. 6 employers would each take no more than 2 or 3 apprentices. The model required more scheduling and more instructor flexibility, but it removed the concentration risk. Imani shifted classroom modules, paired participants by transportation corridor, and identified which stipend costs could be delayed without breaking commitments. Former apprentices began introducing her to supervisors they trusted. By late afternoon, 3 organizations had agreed to review candidates. None had committed. Malcolm arrived after sunset carrying a 1-page statement. It said he considered Imani a valued member of his family and remained personally committed to her educational work. It did not mention the false announcement, his authorization, Corinne's custody of the records, or the frozen accounts. "This changes nothing," Imani said. "It corrects the impression that I rejected you. No one said you rejected me. That is what people will assume. They will assume whatever protects you from admitting what you signed." Malcolm offered temporary restoration of access, while counsel reviewed the instruments. Imani asked whether Corinne would lose custody, whether he would suspend the authorization, and whether he would recuse from the fellowship decision. He said a public suspension would trigger questions from donors and directors. "Good," Imani said. "You do not understand the scale of the consequences." "I understand 120 consequences by name." He looked at the cards, and, for a moment, the private father appeared. Then he placed the statement on the table and asked her to sign the temporary access agreement. "No, Imani. My name does not turn a private favor into accountability." Malcolm left the statement behind and walked out without surrendering any power. The next morning, Corinne circulated a notice to every employer partner warning that continued coordination with Imani could create compliance risk. 2 organizations paused interviews. Imani forwarded the notice to the external assessor, added it to the review file, and returned to the placement map. Corinne had seen that Imani could work without family permission. Now, she was trying to make cooperation with Imani feel dangerous. Former apprentices became the first bridge. One introduced Imani to a municipal fleet contractor willing to review 2 diesel maintenance candidates. Another connected her to a hospital facilities director who needed 3 building systems trainees. A transit subcontractor offered to interview 2 participants if Harbor Skills moved a certification module forward by 1 week. Imani rebuilt the instructor schedule before lunch, combined 2 safety sessions, and persuaded a retired instructor to return for 4 days. The numbers changed in measurable steps. 12 placements lost, 4 restored, then 7, then 10. By the end of the 3rd day, 6 employers had signed partnership letters protecting 118 of the 120 paid seats. The external assessor confirmed that the revised network could operate without Bellamy Industrial Holdings or the Transition Council. Harbor Skills records also verified an 86% completion rate, 78% 6-month job retention, and 0 restricted fund compliance findings under Imani's directorship. The change did not arrive with applause. It arrived as 6 signatures, a spreadsheet marked 118 protected, and 2 unresolved cards still lying apart from the others. "We're not done," Imani said. Marisol leaned against the table. "We protected 118 seats in 3 days, and 2 people still have no placement. That does not erase what you did." "No, but what I did does not erase them either." The result changed the balance of power. Corinne could no longer claim Harbor Skills depended entirely on Bellamy control. The assessor began reviewing Imani's budgets, partner agreements, instructor schedules, and participant support records as a separate question from the estate dispute. Imani's work was being tested without reference to her surname. Corinne responded before dawn. Her office contacted the largest stipend donor and supplied a certification asserting that the archived original had been superseded, that Imani had received notice, and that fellowship authority had lawfully transferred. The donor requested immediate clarification. Corinne also pressed Harlem Manufacturing to maintain its suspension and told trustees that Imani's independent employer outreach proved she was operating outside authorized governance. Julian watched the pressure build from inside the Transition Council. The comparison schedule in his packet still carried Imani's name. He knew Corinne's displayed version did not. He remained silent, protecting the succession position the revised materials seemed to give him. Malcolm received the fellowship performance report and saw that Imani had restored 10 placements without family help. He still refused to suspend his authorization. Admitting the process was compromised would mean admitting that his signature had enabled it. Late that afternoon, Dana sent a limited notice. The independent archive had located the dark green original instrument. It would remain sealed until the estate review panel completed custody and execution checks. Imani read the message twice, then closed it. Located did not mean authenticated. Original did not mean controlling. Even a favorable estate finding would not release the stipends or determine who should lead Harbor Skills. She returned to the 2 unresolved cards. One belonged to Renee, an industrial maintenance trainee who needed an evening site near a bus route. The other belonged to Marcus, whose certification sequence no longer matched the remaining instructor schedule. Imani called 3 smaller employers and received 3 polite refusals. At 7 that evening, she spread placement maps across the second-hand dining table in her East Baltimore row house. Her mother's gold earrings rested in a dish beneath the lamp. Aunt Celeste arrived with soup, ignored Imani's claim that she was not hungry, and set 2 bowls beside the employer list. "You are allowed to be hurt and still be competent," Celeste said. Imani looked at the sealed archive notice. "I do not know whether I want the document to help me." "Then do not ask it to tell you who you are." Imani folded the notice and returned to the placement map. She had protected 118 seats. The program could survive the Bellamy family. Whether the institution would let it survive was now the larger question. Current certification triggered the blow the fellowship could not absorb. The stipend donor froze the restricted account pending review. The Education Trust placed Imani on temporary unpaid leave from operational leadership to avoid the appearance of self-dealing. She could submit records but could not direct staff, contact donors for Harbor Skills, or represent herself as its acting director. The notice arrived while she stood beneath the number 118 on the whiteboard. "They suspended you after you rebuilt the cohort," Marisol said. "They suspended me because Corinne gave them a document designed to make caution look neutral." A second email followed. One instructor who needed certainty accepted permanent work elsewhere. 10 minutes later, another did the same. Their departure removed 2 certifications from the opening schedule and pushed the remaining staff beyond what Imani considered safe. A family office employee arrived to collect the program laptop and restricted files. Imani surrendered them after confirming that the external assessor already had authorized copies. She kept only personal notes and participant cards containing no protected financial information. Outside, A reporter asked whether she was contesting her father's will to gain control of a family-funded program. Imani declined to comment. Participant emails began arriving. Was orientation canceled? Were stipends gone? Should they accept other training offers? She was no longer authorized to answer for harbor skills. That cost cut deeper than the luncheon. Corinne had first taken a chair and a folder. Now the institution had taken Imani's ability to reassure people who trusted her. Malcolm called once. She let go to voicemail. Counsel says the archived instrument has been located, he said. Do not respond publicly until we know what it means. Imani deleted nothing and answered nothing. The original remained sealed. It could not open the stipend account or restore her role. Her first strategy, regaining clean access before the program collapsed, had failed. She changed the plan. At home, she opened a blank document titled Harbor Skills Independent Continuation Plan. She built it around conditions the Bellamy family could not revoke: participant representation, employer concentration limits, dual authorization for restricted funds, independent conflict review, and no automatic family appointments. She identified a community foundation capable of acting as temporary fiscal sponsor. She asked Marisol, in a personal capacity, whether staff would review the plan. She contacted 2 participant representatives and told them plainly that she was suspended and could promise nothing. Both agreed to participate. She also disclosed the Harlan concentration error in the draft rather than hiding it. The new structure would not protect her from review. It would make review permanent. By the next afternoon, the trust issued delayed start notices to all 120 participants. The 2 missing instructors had not been replaced. Renee and Marcus still had no placements. Corinne's certification remained in the formal record. Malcolm still had not publicly admitted what he signed. The archived evidence had not been read. Imani returned to the training site and found the door code changed under trust instruction. Through the glass, she could see the whiteboard with 118 still written across it. The number proved the program could survive operationally. It did not prove she would be allowed to lead it, that the stipends would be released, or that the final 2 participants would have anywhere to train. She placed her hand against the glass, then lowered it. Corinne had not defeated her by disproving her work. She had made the institution too afraid to let the work continue. Dana sent one final message that evening. Both disputed estate folders were now in neutral custody. Authentication would begin at the next panel session. Nothing about the contents. Nothing about the likely result. Imani put the phone face down. For the first time since the luncheon, there was no immediate action left that she was authorized to take. Harbor Skills was frozen. Its instructors were leaving. Its participants were waiting, and she had been formally removed from the program she built. The estate review panel met in a neutral conference suite maintained by the trust's outside fiduciary administrator. No Bellamy portraits hung on the walls. No office controlled by Corinne handled the records. The 3 panel members placed the dark green original and the cream revised summary on opposite sides of the table. Imani arrived with her continuation plan and the 2 unresolved participant cards. Her suspension remained active. The stipend account remained frozen. Dana testified first. She confirmed that 2 differently labeled summaries entered the routing system, that the later one lacked the normal authentication code, and that Corinne's office ordered it placed in luncheon packets before independent review. Her firm depended on Bellamy contracts, and answering plainly could cost her years of work. She still limited herself to what the records showed. She did not claim to know which instrument controlled, what Malcolm intended, or what the panel should decide. That restraint separated corroboration from advocacy and made it harder for Corinne's attorneys to dismiss her as Imani's ally. The archive specialist then verified the dark green original through its intake seal, wedding signatures, witness and notarial records, and unbroken storage log. The alleged superseding document had no complete execution file in the independent archive and no valid acknowledgement showing Imani had received notice. Corinne's attorney argued that the transition counsel relied on Malcolm's delegated authority. The panel chair offered Corinne a narrower path: withdraw the disputed summary, surrender all document custody, and correct the luncheon record while authentication continued. If she did, the panel would not make a finding that she deliberately misrepresented the record. Corinne looked toward Malcolm. He did not meet her eyes. The original was superseded, she said. Imani was notified. The chair repeated the offer. Corinne refused and signed a final certification affirming both claims. Her choice turned a premature presentation into a documented assertion the records could test. Julian testified next. He admitted that his earlier comparison schedule still named Imani and that he noticed the difference during the luncheon, but remained silent because the revised materials benefited him. He surrendered the schedule. Its metadata showed that Imani's removal entered the presentation materials after the earlier comparison was circulated. The schedule corroborated timing. It did not decide the estate question. Malcolm was questioned last. Did you review the succession attachment before signing the administration authorization? The chair asked. No. Did you know Corinne's office controlled both event materials and document routing? Yes. Did you have power to require independent custody before the luncheon? Yes. Why did you refuse to suspend the process after Imani challenged it? Malcolm looked at his signature. Because suspending it would have exposed that I approved a process I had not reviewed. I told myself I was protecting the trust. I was protecting myself. The admission entered the record without applause or comfort. The panel ruled him conflicted. He could provide facts, but he could not authenticate the instrument, direct the review, vote on the fellowship, or appoint anyone to resolve it. During the recess, Malcolm approached Imani near the vending machines. I should have said it before they asked. Yes. I knew my signature was the problem. Yes. I did not expect forgiveness. Then do not make forgiveness the next task you assign me. He accepted the sentence and moved away. The panel reconvened late in the afternoon. It found the original authentic, the revised summary unsupported as a controlling instrument, Corinne's office outside its authority, and Malcolm's negligence a material cause of the misuse. The chair ordered the original entered into the estate record and scheduled the formal reading before the trust's representatives. Corinne's certification remained in the file, now measured against records she had been offered a chance to respect. Separately, the external workforce assessor completed review of Harbor Skills budgets, contracts, outcomes, and continuation plan. The assessor also interviewed instructors, employer partners, and participant representatives so the decision would not rest on Imani's own account. The estate evidence was ready to answer who the record named. The program evidence was ready to answer who had earned the right to lead. The formal session began with the dark green original placed before the designated reader. Present were the panel, trust representatives, Malcolm, Corinne, Julian, Dana, and Imani. The reader opened the instrument and read the relevant clause aloud. It named Imani Elise Bellamy as Malcolm Everett Bellamy's direct legal daughter and beneficiary under the executed estate plan. It assigned her a defined interest that had not been lawfully removed by the unauthenticated summary used at the luncheon. No one cheered. Dana closed her eyes for one breath. A trustee wrote a note. Corinne sat rigidly with both hands flat on the table. Imani felt relief, anger, and grief arrive together. The reading restored a fact that should never have required public proof. She remembered every occasion when Malcolm had introduced her only by her professional name, because explaining the relationship felt inconvenient, and every private promise that public clarity could wait. The clause ended the lie in the record, but it did not erase what waiting had cost. It did not restore the presentation she lost, the delayed stipends, the instructors who left, or the years Malcolm allowed her to exist as a private daughter in public ambiguity. The panel chair stated the limit clearly. The finding corrected the estate record and the false public claim about Imani's identity and beneficiary status. It did not establish professional authority over Harbor Skills. The trust corrected the family governance record, amended the luncheon minutes, withdrew the succession summary, and required Corinne's office to issue a factual correction. Only after the estate folder was closed did the Independent Education Trust Committee begin the program review. It considered harbor skills agreements, audited expenses, participant retention work, employer records, and Imani's response to the Harlan concentration failure. The external assessor verified the 86% completion rate, 78% 6-month retention, and absence of restricted fund compliance findings under her leadership. Marisol testified about the emergency schedule, the direct participant calls, and Imani's refusal to promise money she could not authorize. Former apprentices confirmed that the 6 new employer relationships came from years of program work, not Malcolm's influence. The committee found that Harbor Skills could operate outside Bellamy control and that its performance was attributable to Imani and the team she built. It also found that her employer concentration mistake was real, disclosed, and already being corrected through a stronger placement model. That distinction mattered to Imani. Recognition did not require pretending she had never made an error. It required showing what she did when the error became costly. The committee approved transfer of the restricted assets to an independently governed nonprofit, subject to the existing donor and regulatory review. The new board offered Imani a fixed-term appointment as executive director. She did not accept immediately. Participant representation, she asked. 2 voting seats, the chair replied. Employer concentration, no single partner above 8% without independent risk review. Automatic Bellamy appointments, none. Can one office freeze restricted funds? No. Dual authorization and independent conflict review. Imani nodded. Then I will accept under the written charter. Her role came from the work trail, not the will. Corinne was removed from the Transition Council and all document routing authority, pending fiduciary and employment review. She was required to surrender records and issue the correction. There was no arrest, no theatrical collapse, and no instant ruin. Julian's preferred succession status was suspended. Any future role would require ordinary qualifications and an independent vote. Malcolm requested the floor after both decisions were complete. I signed an authorization without reviewing the attached schedule, he said. I knew. Curran's office controlled the communication and routing process. When Imani challenged it, I refused to stop it because I did not want my failure exposed. My choice enabled her public removal and allowed a workforce program to become leverage in a family dispute. He requested independent review of his conduct, surrendered his appointment authority over the Education Trust for 18 months, resigned his chair emeritus privileges during that review, and agreed not to participate in Harbor Skills transfer, board selection, or leadership. A trustee asked whether he would challenge the program's separation from family control. No, Malcolm said. The family name did not create her work, and my relationship to her does not give me the right to control its future. His cost was public, institutional, and beyond his power to reverse privately. The original will return to its dark green folder and then to the independent archive. Imani took neither document home. The cream revised summary remained in the review file as evidence of the false public claim. Julian approached her before leaving. I should have spoken at the luncheon, he said. Yes. I benefited from staying silent. Yes. I am sorry. Imani studied him. What you do after losing the benefit will tell me more. Dana asked how the corrected record should list her. Use my full legal name in the estate file, Imani said. Use Imani Brooks for Harbor Skills. She did not need to erase Bellamy to belong to herself, and she did not need to wear it professionally as payment for recognition. The Independent Harbor Skills Board met the following week in a borrowed classroom at a community foundation office. Participant representatives approved the conflict rules. The employer cap entered the charter. Dual authorization was adopted before the first restricted dollar moved. One smaller manufacturer accepted Marcus. Renee still needed an evening industrial maintenance placement near a bus route. 3 days before the revised start date, a neighborhood hospital opened one facility slot. Renee accepted. All 120 participant cards moved into the protected column. The stipend account reopened under the independent fiscal structure. The 2 instructors who left did not return, and Imani did not pretend their loss had been harmless. She hired one temporary instructor and reduced the opening week schedule rather than overload the remaining staff. Participants received direct calls before the formal notice went out. Some were relieved. Some were angry. One asked how people with so much money had been allowed to interfere with transportation stipends. Because the structure allowed it, Imani said. The new structure will not. Malcolm requested a meeting before orientation. Imani declined and sent written terms. She would consider one private meeting after the first cohort week. No press. No public statements on her behalf. No governance-linked gifts. No assumption that accountability had purchased forgiveness. Malcolm accepted without revision. On orientation morning, Imani wore her mother's gold earrings and a navy jacket over a gray blouse. The new office held second-hand desks, participant index cards, and the childhood workflow notebook she had finally taken from her shelf. She opened it before the doors unlocked. On one page, 10-year-old Imani had drawn a line of paper stations. Malcolm had written beside it, "A system tells the truth when every delay can be traced." He had taught her something true and failed to live by it. Both facts could remain. At 9, the first participants entered. Marisol handed out revised schedules. The new board chair welcomed the cohort without mentioning the Bellamy family, the will, or the review. Harbor skills began under terms no spouse, father, or family office could revoke a loan. Malcolm came to the training site later for the meeting Imani permitted. He brought no staff and no gift. "The room looks different," he said. "It is governed differently." He asked whether he could attend a future class. As a guest, Imani said. The word returned without humiliation. "No press. No do un announcement. Do not introduce yourself as the reason this exists. Understood. And do not speak for me. I will not." She believed he intended to try. Intention was not trust. "I am not ready to decide what our relationship becomes." "You do not need to. That is the first correct thing you have said without a panel requiring it." Pain crossed his face. She did not withdraw the sentence. He left after 12 minutes. Imani returned to the workshop, where an instructor needed help rearranging the evening lab. The work did not pause to honor her emotional resolution. That was part of its dignity. The will had restored what the record called her. Her choices and work established what she would. Lead. Weeks later, Dana completed the archive inventory and found an older apprenticeship charter bearing 2 founder signatures. The first was familiar. The second had been crossed out in every later public copy. Only a woman's initials remained beneath the removal mark. Imani's record had been corrected. Somewhere deeper in the same institution, another woman's name had been missing for decades. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.